Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the third episode of the Brick by Brick series, where we talk to the brightest minds across the world on building insurgent brands in a fundamentally strong manner, brick by brick. The topic for today is creating new categories and enduring customer love. We have with us Rohan Mirchandani, co-founder and CEO of Epigamia, the brand that created and owns the Greek yogurt category. Rohan, thank you so much for joining us. And this should be a very interesting conversation as, especially in the current environment. If I even think of our portfolio, there are a lot of brands, founders that were digitally first, who are considering expanding into the offline channel. And, the online unit economics is coming under stress as founders try and push hard in the online channel beyond a certain scale. So, it should be a very good conversation with respect to the offline channel and what it takes to build that out as well. Throughout the conversation, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A tab. I've allocated 15 minutes towards the end of the conversation to take those questions. So Rohan, let's start off with the founding moment. You were an NRI and had absolutely no connection to Greek yogurt. The odds were like completely stacked up against you. So how did you identify Greek yogurt, as the category you wanted to go after, and what gave you the conviction that, you could pull that off?
Yeah, first, again, thanks, Harry, for having me. Obviously, very excited to be part of anything DSGCP does. So I'm very much a member of the family and always will be. And I'll try to give this a short answer, even though there's a very long story, but I'll try to go as fast as I can. So my sort of exposure to India started back when I was in B school. Right before B school, I had come on a like you rightfully stated, an NRI visit. We used to come every December with my family to visit Mumbai. I'd come for a wedding. I hate when the NRIs come now because they clog the traffic, but that's a different story for a different day. And I had met a local chef and some other folks and started my foray into India and F&B by being an investor. I invested in an ice cream brand called Hokey Pokey, which some of you may be familiar with, which was sort of our Drums Foods first avatar, if I may. And there, again, there was no vision, there was no business plan. It was purely a passion-driven side hustle, side project. I had no intent or desire to be in India. I just sort of invested a very small sum of money into an ice cream parlor, which was India's first cold stone concept that you mix on a stone. Some of you may remember it. We were launched in Bandra. And then I was back in the United States. I just came for a very short stint to launch it and then thought I would do this, over the weekends. And I went to B school. In B school, I started my career in banking and my intent was to sort of go back into finance after B school. I would take a call every maybe Saturday or Sunday to see what's going on in this, maybe once or twice a month. And then in B school, I took a class called Marketing to the Indian Consumer, where I came to India in 2011, December. And that was a big pivotal point in my career and for Drums Food, I guess. And I came for two reasons, actually. One, I came to take the class. And second, I came to look at what's happening with this ice cream parlor, which wasn't really making any money. It was a QSR, concept. I think we were very early at its time. And sort of took this class and one of the guest lecturers was a gentleman named Shripad Nadkarni. Another one was Damodar Mal, who's today the CEO of Reliance Retail. And both of them just sort of, talked about the next 10 or 15 years. Shripad talked about the next 25 years in India and how I remember him saying brands would be born that would stand the test of time. And, we sort of, it was the beginning of modern trade just starting in India and the sort of convergence of new brands and sort of, organizing this very unorganized trade market that existed. And I had that eureka moment, the shivers went up the hair on the arms. And, like I said, that it was the Ghanti Baj Gaye moment. And I realized that there was something much bigger here. There was a calling. So I had that sort of eureka moment and decided that there was a much larger calling here. The larger calling was to build a consumer brand. And obviously we had the ice cream business. It was terrible in unit economics, but it was fantastic from a brand perspective. We had a cult following. People were really coming out there. So I reached out to Shripad and I said, hey, listen, class ends, everyone rushes the guest speaker. So I rushed up there and grabbed his business card. I sent him an email, went back to Philadelphia and said, hey, listen, it was a fantastic lecture you had. really loved what you said. We've got this little ice cream parlor that's in Bandra. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. So he responded saying, of course I've heard of it. It's a fantastic product. If you don't mind me saying, it's just a terrible, terrible brand. And said, what exactly are you looking to do? So we ended up Skyping. Back then, Skype was a big thing. And I sort of explained to him, I said, I was really moved by what you said. So he said, come out to India and let's talk, meet me. So I came, I skipped spring break, my second year of B school, which was a big deal, by the way, and ended up coming to Mumbai, meeting him. And he said, look, I think you've got something, special in terms of what, the space you're in, but we have to look at the larger category. Secondly, he said, I would love to help you, but I will not, I'm not going to be a consultant. I'm going to be too expensive. And I've just sold my company to Publicis. So I'd love to be an investor if that's something we could work on. And third, I'll only do any of this and be involved if you move to India and do this full time. And so that was a big decision I took. It took me some time to sort of figure that out. And then in January 2013, against sort of everybody's advice, said, you're out of your mind. You're going to go to India with a business school degree to work on an ice cream parlor. Made no sense. But I said, I think I have to do this for myself. So January 2013, I moved. I took a one-way ticket. And then I'll quickly sort of tell you the story how it came to Greek yogurt. So we had about 3 parlors when I moved, and I spent all my time in the parlors. I realized that the key sort of, insight I would get is from actually talking to people and consumers. And one of the challenges we had being a premium ice cream brand is people, were not consuming us on a daily basis. The frequency was very low. It was maybe twice a week or maybe just 2 or 3 times a month. So I started literally the first few months, I lived and worked in our ice cream parlor, in Bandra. I literally spent all my time there having conversations, speaking to consumers, trying to understand what was sort of motivating them to not consume us so frequently. And a lot of the insights that we got was it's a cheat meal. We come here to celebrate. And we realized that, by being just a purely cheat meal celebration brand, we had to change focus. Obviously, FMCG was on the cards. We had to sort of reshift our thinking. But one of the things we realized at the premium segment, there's a lot of conversation going around healthier eating and healthier lifestyles. And, there was conversations around protein and just sort of more, clean food, clean eating, and there weren't many options available. And that's where it sort of just unlocked that value in terms of a problem statement that there just weren't many options for healthy snacking. And this came from 3-4 months at the parlor talking to people. And one of the thoughts for the business was to venture into a larger, sort of category, not just ice cream and dairy. And that's where, looking at our supply chain and coming with my co-founder chef, developing dairy sourcing, fruit sourcing, we decided that Greek yogurt would be an excellent sort of product to launch, given everything we've done and everything we've learned from consumers. And I also happened to be one of the first Chobani consumers when I was an undergrad on campus. So I was a huge fan of the brand and what they did. So culminating in all of this, in 2015, we launched Epigamia. So 2015 was sort of the soft launch, and then 2016 was a hard launch.
Interesting. And it's very interesting that you mentioned you thought about a larger category, whereas, in our head, we consider Epigamia as sort of a category creation story. And, there are a lot of our founders in the portfolio and outside that are creating new categories in the country. So, when you started out, how did you think about, what the addressable market could be and how big it could become? Because Greek yogurt was non-existent when you started.
Yeah, I mean, forget Greek yogurt, even yogurt in its category, it was insignificant. And obviously we were told by, and this is very relevant to some of the founders here, we were told by pretty much every VC that, the category is too small, whatever that means. I think the reality, Hari, for us, when you look at the category and market sizing, et cetera, number one, it was to look at the larger parent that we fall under. So the larger parent we fell under was dairy, right? And today and by dairy, I don't mean just milk dairy. Even today, plant-based dairy is part of the larger parent, which is dairy. So that sort of gives it some credence. Now, we don't sell milk, nor will we never sell just plain fresh milk. We have a lot of value-added milk categories like almond milk and milkshake, and we can talk about that later. But for us, the idea was, we fall in this larger parent. And what that means, let me sort of define what that means. What that means is the product profile was not new to consumers, right? So in essence, the category was brand new. But if you look at Greek yogurt, it's, nothing more than, taking the plain old Gujarati Shrikhand, removing the nuts, lowering the sugar, and you get Greek yogurt, right? If you look at our lassis that we do, our smoothies that we do, they're nothing but Punjabi thick lassis, flavored, contemporized, modernized, and sort of made into the products that we have. So if you look at sort of our category, our sort of product portfolio, these aren't things that are sort of new, if I may, right? So if you take, so what do I mean by new? If I look at something like an avocado, it's something very new to the Indian palate. It's something, and by the way, there's a good consumption of avocado today, but it's something that consumers, the Indian palate is not seeing, it's something new. So fermented dairy, if I may, was not necessarily new. The category that we sort of subcategory I would define that we play in was new, was revolutionary. I think I could take the liberty of saying that. I think, so if you look at it in that context, that's where we were able to sort of look at, defining what we thought were going to be our consumers, who would sort of be the first early adopters, and then who followed suit. So, if I still remember when we were doing our trials for our mango Greek yogurt, I had given it to some of our premium Hokey Pokey parlor consumers, but I also, we gave it to so many people, including my help at home, including my driver, and all of them absolutely loved the product. Had I tried giving them avocado, they would have spit it out. So, and not because of anything else. I remember my help at home saying, "Ye to shrikhand hai." Like she looked at me like, "What's so special about this product you've come up with?" And that's where I think, something to think about when you think of larger categories. What's the relevance that you can create from a product perspective, so that consumers are just not, it's not completely new. You can create the brand experience, the sort of consumer experience, but some relativity when it comes to what consumers want. And I think that's where we were somewhat able to crack the code.
Got it. Understood. And, the other interesting thing was, you already had incumbents like Nestle and Amul, and, you had priced your product at a premium to these incumbents. So, if you were to go back and think through, your first set of super users, given it's an offline brand, maybe your first 100 stores that eventually became super users, how did you get those early inroads? And what would your advice be for? Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying?
No, I was just saying, what would your advice be for, founders that are looking for those, initial set of stores in the offline channel that could become power users?
Yeah. So two questions. So first one, let me answer the pricing one. So, I guess three questions: pricing, users, and then stores, I think. So let me go in that sequence. So if I look at pricing, we were very clear that, when we started, we were Greek yogurt. So, Greek yogurt was 3 times the protein of regular yogurt, 2.5 times the protein of an egg, 1 egg. And so we really wanted to hone in and demonstrate that this was a premium product. Now, unfortunately, it comes in a cup, you have to scoop it out. So on the shelf, it was put into the dairy section along with the other yogurts and maybe some yogurt beverages that were out there. But we really wanted to signal to the market that this was far superior product. And of course, margins also had to make sense, right? Unit economics had to make sense. So we were actually priced, if I'm not mistaken, almost 50 to 60% premium to whatever yogurt products are out there. Now, some of the competition, at that time were either supply chain folks who had excess milk, were milk cooperatives with excess milk, and were just trying to do every product under the sun. So they weren't focused on product there. There was just more supply chain, value addition game for them. Or, they just thought they knew the Indian market, but they didn't. They were really focused on thinking that they were foreign brands, and as long as they put their products on the shelf, they would sell. So I think in some sense we got lucky, because those are the only 2 strategies in the market. No one really focused on the product itself. And therefore, if you looked at sort of our pricing strategy, 1, our signal to the market, but 2, I'm a huge believer, and I think DSGCP is as well, that, India still is very much a value market. So if there's a value proposition to be had, consumers will sort of go out there. I think the story of Audi is a great one. Audi as a car has done so well in the Indian market in the premium super luxury segment, has gone head to head with the BMW and the Mercedes. I mean, every year the numbers change. And, if you look at the fundamentals of the vehicle, I mean, it's probably the best sort of engineering possible out there. And people are willing to pay a premium, because you don't have to service the car that often, et cetera, et cetera. There was some articles that came out about this a few years ago in ET, then anyone wants to know, I'm happy to find and share. If you look at our product, it wasn't just a plain yogurt. If you were trying to make it at home, if you deconstruct the Greek yogurt, you take milk, you ferment it, you make dahi at home, you strain it. By the time you've strained it, it's, 2 or 3 cups of dahi to 1 Greek yogurt. Then you add fresh mangoes, fresh Apus mangoes that we use from Ratnagiri. And at the end of the day, you were paying more to make it at home than you would to buy it from us. And that's where we believe, and we have had the signaling early on in our social media. We talked about this, what it takes. And that's where I think we were able to win early on in terms of the pricing strategy. Later on, it became really generating trials. So we had to work on how to generate trials because our repeat rate was very high. But early on, that sort of signaling helped. And then for us, the low-hanging consumers, the part two of the question, were the health nuts, right? We're the gym goers. Luckily for us, we did have a little bit of an advantage. We had this database of ice cream consumers who would only come once a month or once every 6 months. And we sort of, qualified them as saying they like ice cream, but they don't want to eat it that often. So we really reached out to them. Initially, our offline sort of work we did was we work a lot with dietitians. So we launched, we sponsor dietitian events. And then we did a lot of fitness events. So the equivalent of these sort of mud races, the Tough Mudder mud races we did. We worked a lot with gyms and yoga studios to do sampling. We're really, really honed in on who our early adopters would be. Again, this won't be the same for everybody, but we knew exactly who our early adopters would be. We're sort of the health and fitness nuts. And then from there, we sort of focused in on where do they purchase. So obviously the easy answer was Nature's Basket, but that's a tough one, right? Because you have to pay your slotting fees and your listing fees. And today they literally charge you an arm and a leg to launch. But, so we built up to getting into Nature's Basket, but we also identified probably 50, 60 super premium, independent GT stores in Mumbai, thanks to knowing where these consumers live and work. And we attacked that as well. So that's how we started off. I think in our first year, our distribution was maybe 150, 200 stores, which is nothing. But that's how we sort of started off in our first cohort of stores.
Got it. And as I said, there are a bunch of founders that are, trying to create new categories, etc. Knowing what you know now, what would your advice be for these founders on, what to focus on in the first, maybe 2 years of their journey?
Yeah. So, I know it's very cliche, but honestly, living and dying by your consumer is end all be all, right? And I'll give you some specific examples. I won't just leave it at a cliche statement. I think what ends up happening is a couple of things. One is we always solve for our own problems. We don't know if that problem is everyone's problem, or at least a larger cohort's problem. So that's the first thing, that's really important to sort of understand. We loved our ice cream. We thought it was great. I still think it's one of the best ice creams ever made. Back then, when we were sort of figuring it out, was it really a problem that we were trying to solve, right? And we thought it was, but something we learned. And then finally, when we got the insights for yogurt, we found that there was something missing that consumers really wanted and sort of forayed. Now, what I mean by end all and be all in terms of living and dying by your consumer is even today, whatever scale we're at, consistently having conversations, and literally what I mean by that is senior leadership on the phone, hammering it out, talking to actual consumers that are paying rupees, not just your family and friends, actually having those conversations and what you're hearing, is this price really an issue? Is there really too much sugar? Is sugar really a concern? Is there something else? These are all, and I'm obviously being very specific to food, but this cuts across everything. Is this really something that you're solving for? And then also when you're starting out, like as I mentioned, our journey, sort of how we launched, wasn't just saying, let's go attack stores and launch. You can go and find the fanciest and best store and the ones that do phenomenal numbers for others and put your products in those stores. But how are they going to turn, right? How are consumers going to know they're there? So the best way to start out is actually finding, and especially for some of the D2C guys, I think you guys have a brilliant footprint, starting out by seeing where your consumers are, where are they purchasing, and going to those stores first. Even if you have 5 or 6 consumers that are purchasing in a store, it's enough to get those people to start talking about it, and word of mouth spreads really fast, as we know. So honing in on where your consumers are, where they purchase, and looking at those cohort of stores first, rather than going with assumptions that, where our competitors are or where we think the premium stores are. At least for the first 2, 3, 4, 500 stores, I would really, really hone in where your consumers are, having those conversations. And by conversations, I mean literally picking up the phone and calling them, offering them a freebie to have a conversation with you, and really understanding what their day looks like. Now people are back at work. Do they shop on the way home? Do their mothers shop for them? Do their wives shop for them? Do their husbands shop for them? Who does the purchasing? And then really finding out how does it reach their home, their household. So these are things that are super important. We spent a lot of time on this early on, and then identified where our first cohorts were. And then once you have your first cohorts, sampling, et cetera, spending time in those stores, building the footprint, and expanding from there. So that would be sort of my very simple advice, an example as to what I mean by live and sort of die by your consumer.
Got it. No, very useful, Rohan. And if I may add, the other, recommendation that we always have for founders, that are on category creation journeys is to focus on business sustainability as well, because when the market opens up is anybody's guess, but just being there and having the staying power ensures that you're there to win the market whenever you hit the inflection point. That actually brings me to, the next section that I wanted to cover in our talk, which is around sustainable business building and best practices in the offline channel. So, just talking about fundamentals in the offline channel, can you talk us through the metrics that you monitor? What does your dashboard look like in terms of metrics that you monitor on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis?
Yeah. So look, it's not rocket science. I mean, it's offline. I mean, others have been doing it for a while. I think we sort of, tend to overlook at the data, which is important for us. But, basic sort of, I'd say four, buckets of sort of metrics that we look at, right? So for us, distribution metrics are very important. And by distribution, I mean, not just expanding distribution, but even within the distribution, store, the throughputs within the store. So we're up to about 22 or 23,000 distribution points today, which is, far from our goal of maybe 150,000 that we're still, aiming towards. It's a little tougher for us because we're a cold chain product. So, it's a little more difficult for us to just sort of spray and then move on from there. So we have to sort of fundamentally develop distributors and make sure our supply chain is intact and make sure there's no compromising on the cold chain for us. So for us, just for distribution metrics, we've got the sort of straightforward, sales executive productivity, throughputs per store, volume and rupee wise, our vehicle throughput. So how many, because it's cold chain, how many drops are our vehicles doing? Our distributor service norms, how often are our distributors servicing the stores? Service package, what we mean by service package is, and we change this, probably every month or 2 months, is depending on the store's performance, what portfolio should be in that store. Should it have, for example, not every one of our stores has our plant-based products, right? It's a subset of our distribution. And then at what point do we want to try some of the premium products in some of the stores that have been faring well? So, these are some of those metrics. And then in terms of supply chain metrics, fill rates, OTIF, those are sort of straightforward. And then in terms of working capital, looking at sort of days outstanding and then the distributor ROI. So for us, distributor ROI is an interesting one and could be interesting for some of the folks on the call. When we started our journey, a lot of folks will tell you that, it's probably makes a lot of sense to go direct first. And when I mean by direct, I don't mean direct to consumer. Folks on here would do something even that's one layer up. We were sort of D2S, direct to stores, which was a big thing. We were the new ones that I think ID was probably the first to start, and then we did it as well, ID Fresh. And what was interesting for us, while I'd love to tell you that it was some revolutionary model that we came up with, we frankly could not, for the life of us, get a distributor to carry our products. I mean, I have sat in offices with my hands folded, begging distributors to try to carry our product. And they said, Danone has failed miserably. We have no interest in carrying your product. So we were literally forced to create our own cold chain company because we really believed in what we were doing. And then once we got scale, we realized that it made more sense now to sort of move to distributors because of working capital, because of unit economics, profitability. Distributors carrying multiple products, we're only carrying our own. So for us, distributor economics becomes very important. Again, not something new. Most of the offline guys do this, but something we track very carefully because the last thing we want is for them to be disinterested and not reach the service levels we need them to in terms of supply chain, cold chain integrity, et cetera, et cetera. So I know I've rambled a couple of metrics here, but these are sort of the baseline metrics that we follow.
Got it. And, could you give some guidance? It obviously varies by category in terms of what's like the gold standard when it comes to store throughput, sales force productivity, et cetera. What are the benchmarks that you use internally?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfair, Hari, to sort of categorize ours as others because it's really category led. So for example, right, sales force productivity, you want to be hitting 25 to 30 stores a day. And then you're looking at a subset of bill cuts, depending on which the store profiles is, how many bills are they cutting, how many, sort of orders are they taking. I mean, obviously you want 100%, but, there's some leeway. So 80, 90%, depending on the beat that they're going on. I think that number should be probably higher if you're purely an offline, purely like a large shelf life, no cold chain category player. It could also be very different in terms of bill cuts, because for us, we need 1 to 2 bill cuts a week, not even 1 to 2, 2 to 3 actually, because our shelf life is low. You're replenishing often. You're replenishing that many times. I remember back in our ice cream days, we didn't need more than 1 or 2 a month, right? Because you had a 12-month shelf life. And then for us, we're also looking at freshness, returns. So the SC has to put some more effort in at the store. So I think a lot of these sort of variables play in terms of, our productivity. Our throughputs are very high. I don't have the exact numbers because, again, our distribution expansion is slow and steady due to the fact that we're cold chain. We can't just blitz into another 20,000 stores overnight. We have to slowly and surely build these up. So our throughputs have to be good in order for us to keep expanding. So, if you look at, so ours will probably tend to be higher than most, especially in the stores that we're in. We also have our lifestyle products. So, people aren't celebrating with Greek yogurt during Diwali and Christmas or when they score well on an exam. This is more a daily consumption product. So I can look up exactly what those numbers are and happy to share them, but we will tend to be higher than other categories.
Got it. Just talking about these metrics, and you touched upon working capital as well, which is an important, consideration in the offline channel. Do you have recommendations on, any tools, software that has helped you as you scaled?
Yeah. So, we always use sort of, Salesforce automation from day one. Back then it was, again, when we started using it in sort of 15, 16 with ice cream. So, we were one of the first Bazam users. In fact, they've done case studies with us. So that was really amazing what we're doing now. Of course, everyone's doing it. There's many options out there. I think it's not really about the option. It's about how you execute it. So making sure that you're really on top of your game. I highly encourage the early folks starting out, please do your own sales. Don't leave it to your distributors. If you're going direct, great. If not, right now, let the distributors do fulfillment and sort of supply chain for you. And obviously, we'll talk about working capital in a second. I really encourage you to do your own sales. Even now, we do our own sales. And I think for a long time, we will. It's really important to own that store, have that relationship yourself. And then most importantly, collect the data, right? If you're doing your own sales, you can collect data. Getting third-party data, honestly, is not going to be accurate. And it's going to be too late until you can do your analysis. So really having that data early on. And then also sort of coming back to the working capital question, honestly, when we started out, our days outstanding were like 90, 95 days. Early on, whether you like it or not, your new retailers are not going to give you upfront payment. Maybe the first bill you cut, sure, but to replenishment wise, if you want to push, they're not going to do it. So you have to work out a healthy norm there. What works for your balance sheet, what works for your cash flow, and what works for a business as well. Because once you start, you want to keep that momentum going. What's important, I think, is making sure that over time, you're looking at that data, making sure you're monitoring the sales sort of data points, and making sure it translates to cash, right? So for example, and this will, I wish someone had told us this back then, because we were definitely, under the impression that we're going to have to figure out a way to sustain this the rest of our lives, but that wasn't the case. And let me give you an example. We went from 95 days outstanding in 2016, 2017 to 6 days outstanding today. And what that does is, and that's not going to happen overnight. It's just not. What that did though, is it showed us that the strength of the brand, the sales throughputs, the focus on consumer, all of these things pay dividend to working capital over time, right? And, I've been asked this many times, how do you sort of measure the strength of your brand? You measure the strength of your brand through working capital. When distributors and retailers are willing to shell out cash for your product and your brand, you've crossed the chasm. You've done a good job. And I think it's very important for the sort of entrepreneurs out there, and especially for founders and CEOs, to consistently track the movement, is this 90 coming down to 80, to 65, to 60, to 50, and put pressure on your team to do that. I think it's tough, from day one. If you start pressuring them to pay up front, you'll be able to monitor it, but then there's a trade-off because you're not going to get the growth. So again, you have to see what your balance sheet can afford, what your cash flow can afford. And I think it's really important to have that trade-off. If you can afford to sort of let it go for a little bit, but then making sure that that's coming down. If that number goes up or it's staying flat, that's not showing health as far as I'm concerned. So really important to sort of, look at days outstanding as a very important metric for the brand health.
No, that's a very interesting definition of brand strength, and can't agree more. Distributors paying upfront, no better validation. Now, just moving on to the brand itself, Rohan, and just understanding how Epigamia got to where it is when it comes to customer love. When you started out, what was your hypothesis in terms of the positioning for Epigamia as a brand? What was the hypothesis in terms of what Epigamia as a brand should stand for?
Right. So we were very sort of laser focused on this from day one. I mean, I'd probably spend more time on this than anything else. So for us, there were, like I said, and this is going to be a long answer, so just stay with me, and I'm happy.
No, it's an important one. Please take the time.
Yeah.
And on that, sorry, Rohan, quickly for the audience, if you guys have questions, please use the Q&A tab. Yeah, back to you, Rohan.
Absolutely. So again, starting with those consumer insights we talked about, right? In terms of when I was sitting at those ice cream parlors, talking to consumers, when we moved into ice cream FMCG as well. So obviously I already alluded to this earlier, but number one was sort of the lifestyle piece. And we found that there was an inherent demand for healthier snacking. Consumers were looking for something on the go, healthy snacking, et cetera. But what that did is the consumers we were speaking to and the ones who were sharing these insights tended to be sort of an older audience. And when I say older audience, in the world of marketing, things end at sort of 35, 40. So because that's where you're anchoring your positioning. So we found that sort of that 25 to 30-year-old audience is who we really wanted to speak to, because they're the ones that started seeing a pain point. I'd even go further to say 28 to 32, if I'm remembering my numbers exactly. And I'm a big fan of really focusing early on a sharp positioning. The other thing we found was these folks, and the reason for that age group was these folks were the ones that were now willing to shell out a little bit of money for and really look at value propositions in healthier eating vis-a-vis, the college grad who probably is, looking to splurge on indulgence, maybe beer or whatever that is, right? The early college grad, and also has restricted pocket money or savings. So this is, now you've sort of moved into your second, potentially third job. You're somewhat on your way to getting established in your career. You're low to mid-level manager, sort of late 20s, early 30s. And we found that this is when you sort of now had time to think about health. That was one big insight. The other thing we found, honestly, just simple stuff that came from the ice cream parlors, is we'd find that couples would come in, so whether they were early married or they were boyfriend, girlfriend, or something else, because this was the point in your life at this late 20s, early 30s, where people were starting to be in relationships. So like I said, either you were arranged married very recently, or you had a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a combination or whatever it was. And the word compromise, which had never existed in your vocabulary before, started entering your vocabulary. And what I mean by that is, for the first time, now that you're in a relationship, you're compromising on things. It's not about where you want to eat. It's about you both want to eat. It's not about where you want to go on vacation. It's about where you both want to go on vacation. And again, these were insights we got straight up, literally sitting in parlors, being on the phone, talking to people. And so now you've got this age group where, you're starting to spend on some premium products because you can afford it. You've got this conversation of health that's entered into your lifestyle because now you're late 20s, early 30s. And this new vocabulary word, compromise, has entered your dictionary, which never existed before, because it's not about you, it's about we. And we found positioning ourselves around these three, gave us a good insight, a good sort of clear, laser sharp communication as to what the brand stood for. And the brand stood for, here's a healthy product, high protein that you don't have to compromise on. And we targeted ourselves towards couple. All our communication, all our first conversation, our first web series that we sponsored, we were involved with What the Folks, was purely around the couple dynamics, relationship dynamics. It also sort of gives a little bit of credence to the larger definition of the name Epigamia, which I'll just take a second and bore your audience. Some of you have heard this, so roll your eyes if you've heard it already, but I'll repeat it. So the term Epigamia where does the name come from? If you go back to our history books, sort of back to 400, 500 BC, you had the great Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, the Macedonian Empire. And then on the Indian side, around the same time, we had the Mauryan Empire, Chandragupta Maurya, the Mauryan Empire on the Indian side. So the Alexander the Great and the Macedonian Greeks had done wars across Europe, had gone across Persia, modern day Afghanistan, and reached the Indian side. And on the Indian side, we had the Mauryan Indians. And it was the first ever war that took place between Eastern and Western civilization. And that war ended, so it ended with the two different definitions. The European history books say that, Alexander the Great's armies got tired and went back. Our history books say we won the war. So who knows? We never know what really happened. But what we do know is the war ended in the first ever documented peace treaty between Eastern and Western civilization, which is called Epigamia in ancient Greek, which means a marriage of civilizations, basically a compromise and a peace treaty. And there we thought, it was a great name to play off this, couples compromise peace, where you can both agree on something. And that's where our first very sharp positioning came around. And honestly, that's all we focused on in the beginning. Every line of communication, every line of advertising, any kind of, in the beginning, there wasn't much advertising, but anything we put on social media channels, anything in store was all around this, here's a product that you don't have to compromise on, catered towards this 28 to 32-year-old SECA metro city consumer profile.
Got it. And, I also see it in the Q&A tab. I think the question is, given you were an offline brand, how were you able to target couples effectively?
Yes. So, and again, I'm sure this is coming from a very D2C consumer. So we didn't, back in, I guess, 2016, 2017, there wasn't much that we could do in terms of, performance marketing because we weren't selling online. Literally our sales online was zero. Maybe a Big Basket had just started. So, but for us, Big Basket was a modern trade account. It wasn't necessarily online selling. So there were a couple of ways to do this for us. Number one is communication. I think that's super critical. What you're communicating will end up reaching the right audience. So, what you're communicating is critical. Secondly, through Facebook, Instagram, back then we used Facebook a lot more. We were able to hone in on, people that said that they were single. So we removed ourselves. So you remove people that said they're single on the platform, right? You can do age groups, you can do metros. So we eliminated folks that said they were single. And then we obviously looked at age groups, et cetera, et cetera. And then even within the stores, it's more about the communication than it is. So if let's say, a 28-year-old or a 28-year-old man or a 32-year-old woman walks into the store, we're not going to go up to them and ask them, hey, are you in a relationship? That's not how it works, because they're going to slap you. What you do is the communication you have should hit them when they see that, that here's a product that you don't have to compromise on. And then, of course, a big sort of outburst for us was the web series that we participated in. We'd reached a little bit of scale, and that was on What the Folks. And that really, really put us out there and gave us some serious wings in terms of the business.
Got it. And, and I've seen it firsthand how the branding and positioning is front and center, even in board meetings, the solar system slide with the concentric circles and all the products. Right. I think one of the things where some of our founders also, face challenges is when they launch newer products. Like your original Greek yogurt product was very sharply positioned, as you mentioned. But now, as you enter products like, let's take milkshakes, for instance, how did you think through, how it fits, within the whole brand architecture, positioning, etc.?
Yeah, so we have a very, as you're aware, a very sort of laser-focused brand architecture, and the concentric circles you talked about, which we keep having in our board meetings. Probably spent half the board meeting talking about those. Where we came up with when we saw Greek yogurt and where we reached a certain phase, and again, this started early on when we were doing our own distribution. We realized that if we really wanted to be an offline player, we had to have in our space. Now, this is not relevant to other spaces, especially not personal care. It's a very different business model. We were never going to be the 9 lakh distribution of Unilever. Maybe we will 10 years from now. But, we'd identified 100 to 150,000 stores that we want to be in, which we've reached about 25% of today. And the way we saw it is that we're going to have a portfolio to go in here, right? We're going to have a portfolio. And now those sort of 28 to 32-year-olds, have become 35 to 40, which is an interesting conversation. Some of them have kids. So these were, offshoots. We had this hardcore, we were a very loyal, hardcore core base. So how do we sort of, expand and play off of that? For us, distribution expansion became, sort of the key driver to the next wave of growth. And then along with distribution expansion was how do we sort of, fit the product portfolio? It can't just be a one product portfolio. We have to sort of expand. So the first thing for us was, of course, within yogurt, we looked at plant-based yogurts, which became sort of our premium range as Greek yogurt became more and more mainstream. And then we looked at something which we called a distribution driver, which was our regular fruit yogurt, which we continue to have, which is a 20 rupee product today, which is not Greek, which is just plain yogurt, which has done very well. But again, I think it was very important for us to establish the brand here and then move to the sort of the more entry-level accessible price points. For us, the idea behind that is to get people to enter the category through a reasonably acceptable price point and then upgrade their way into the larger, sort of more premium price points once they see a value proposition into the brand, right? Again, the story remains the same. We try to sort of focus on similar communication as this is not a product you have to compromise on. But now that we're expanding distribution, expanding sort of cohorts, it's expanding consumer cohorts, income levels, because we've reached that level. It's sort of, for us, the focus is to get people to trial the brand. And that's where we got into fruit yogurt. When we were doing these sort of different, and again, you remember our architecture expansions, one of the sort of discussions they came about is, can we come up with something that it has a little bit longer shelf life, but plays to the core of what Epigamia is, which is really its ingredients and its flavors. It's the fruit sourcing, it's the ingredients, and it's the taste. And that's where we ran a couple of experiments, and I'm very happy to admit we probably failed on 8 out of the 10 experiments. 2 of them really, and I think it's really important. And, I want to communicate this to every founder out there. Please do not lose the experimenting. Keep it up. Of course, do it at a low cost and fail fast, because you can do as much analysis as you want in the office, but really when you get out there and get consumers to pay is when you're going to really know if this is going to work or not. So don't, I think it's really important to do that. And that's what we found with, we struck a chord with milkshakes that our consumer base really accepted it well. Kids, now, as I said, some of those early adopters started having kids. So they started, having their kids try the product. And there's a big faith in the brand, right? They know the brand, where the brand comes from. They know what we stand for. They know about our quality parameters. And that helped us sort of expand distribution much faster, give a portfolio to the product. And again, the goal is very, very, very straightforward. So if you look at any cup or any box of our milkshakes, they will all tell you to go and try Greek yogurt. And it's very important that this was a way for us to acquire consumers into the Epigamia brand and then have them sort of move up the chain in terms of the more premium offerings that we have. So very clear-cut strategy, not much change, just now it's happening at a much larger level.
Right. And I'm seeing some questions from the audience. Maybe just one last question, and then I'll go to the audience questions. In the online channel, there are levers such as content, community, etc., that some of our brands are working on to build brand love. What were the levers that you used in getting to where you are, being a predominantly offline first brand? Either levers or anything to do with the org culture. You mentioned about customer centricity, etc. When you look back, what would you attribute that to in terms of just input metrics, best practices that founders can know about?
Yeah, I mean, again, not rocket science. I think it all really comes down to culture, hustle, being religious about the consumer. I know a lot of my friends on this call, the Sleepy Owl guys, Viva, I mean, we all do it. So it's not that, it's not just us doing it. It's just being completely religious, about the consumer, X, Y, X, X. All these guys, are doing the same thing. I think so what I can do is I can share sort of an excerpt, an example. I think that for me, I always found is, when I was looking for advice, rather than getting gyan, everybody gives high-level gyan. An example helps,
Absolutely.
right? So, and that's all I can do is share examples. I mean, we really haven't done anything that's cutting edge. It's just sort of executed well, I guess. So if I come back to what I mean by being religious about the consumer and the culture, we had something which was a huge problem child. Maybe, I don't know how you may remember. It was before you. I know Deepak will definitely remember. A huge problem child for us was our shelf life and spoilage. Early on in the journey, we'd made Epigamia from a sort of literally like a handcrafted small little place out in Vada, which is 2 hours from Mumbai, and it was all being done manually. Completely manually made Greek yogurt. And when you were making like literally small batches, 1,000 cups, 500 cups, it was manageable. The minute we started to scale that up, it was a complete nightmare. I mean, we would have, spoilage, we would have a lot of issues. And it wasn't really about the source. I mean, we were able to do a good job on figuring out how to have a very clean environment in manufacturing. It was really about the supply chain, right? The product was so sensitive to heat that even a little bit of a heat shock would ruin the product. So what probably be something that could be a 30-day shelf life would expire in 5 or 6 days, right? And honestly, consumer can care less and they shouldn't care about the supply chain. That's not their problem. That's your problem, right? So when the consumer is buying the cup and is sitting in there at home and it's spoiled, they're not blaming the retailer who turned the fridge off at night. They're not blaming the supply chain partner who, the truck that went across. They're blaming you, the brand. It's the brand's fault. And, I always say that it was a huge problem, but I think it became an asset for us because the way we address this is literally every single person in the company was all hands on deck for consumer complaints. It became like a friendly contest. who can reach the Twitter handle first and respond. Try to beat Rohan, because if Rohan will get there before you will. And we were just absolutely religious in not only, you can give consumer freebies, that's fine, but really reaching out to the consumers and telling them, look, let us tell you what's really going on here, right? It's not, come to visit. And we had consumers visit our facilities to see firsthand. Some of them were just disgusted by, the way that the product spoiled. Would come out. We had consumers come out to our facility, see how the product was made, and like, wow, okay, this is a really hygienic, clean environment. I see what you're saying. There were challenges. It reached a point where we had consumers, then the whole thing reversed, would actually yell at retailers, would actually go to stores to pick up. They would email us, they would message us, that retailer's turned the fridge off. And I yelled at him. I yelled at her. And they became our force out there. They became our sales force out there. They were the ones out there, telling us that there's a problem with this store, because they realized that we came from an authentic, genuine place. And it was this sort of religious focus on consumers. We would respond within seconds. We would address the issues. We would have conversations with them. It wasn't just the marketing team. Anyone across the board, would constantly look at issues that came up on email, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it was, and address them immediately. Sales guys would get complaints from the stores, address them immediately. But my point was, how do you address them? You address them by showing them and demonstrating what's happening behind the scenes, not just by saying, sorry, here's a free cup. We did that as well. And I think that's what built sort of a great culture that became consumer first. And then honestly, I think if I go back, it was one of the reasons our brand got built is the way we responded to some of these spoilage complaints. And some of our most loyal users today will tell you that our first interaction with the brand was because our product got spoiled.
Fair enough. No, yeah, nothing
like.
Like.
And sorry, I'll just interrupt for a second. I know we only have a few minutes, but there's a great case study for hotels. When they look at consumers when they go to hotels, and you've got two set of consumers who got the same exact room. One person got exactly what they wanted and left, and was satisfied because they got exactly what they wanted. They may or may not come back. There's one consumer that had a terrible experience. There was a cigarette burn in the bed, but then the hotel upgraded them to a suite. And now they're loyal consumers for life. So we kind of, played off of that and really worked for us, built a great culture for us as well.
Yeah, I think, even I've heard like enough examples of how brands have converted, such disappointing situations into the most loyal customers just by going out of the way. No, that's a great example, Rohan. So I'm going to, shift to the audience questions. We have a lot of them. Let me just try and do some prioritization here. First, let's take this question on why did you choose B2B over B2C for launch? I don't think that's accurate. You want to take that?
Yeah, I guess the question...
Horeca, I guess, question is, why did you start off with Horeca before you went all out?
So we didn't necessarily start off with Horeca. I don't know if I'm understanding this question in two ways. Is the question, did we go to offline first versus D2C, direct to consumer? Or is the question...
No, it is more,
So we didn't go Horeca first. We in the beginning, as I was saying earlier, we focused on... We worked with dietitians, we went to yoga studios, we went to gyms to get the trials going, and then understanding where these folks consumed. And then, of course, from our ice cream parlors, understanding where folks were. So it happened in parallel. I wouldn't say, in fact, Horeca as a business for us came much later. It was more just on identifying the first initial cohorts and really doing, it was more about sampling for us than it was. And that's where we sort of went first. Sampling was focused on these areas first.
Got it. The next one is on breaking into MT. How did you overcome the usual barriers like shelf space constraints, listing fees? What were the secret sauce?
Yeah, I honestly, MT is, I'll say it sort of openly, they're still not the easiest to deal with. They sort of had a fall during COVID, but they've made a big bang comeback now. So we have to give them a lot of love, tender love and care. Look, I think, in the beginning, some of the early accounts, we ended up paying the listing fees, whatever we did. We found, and this wasn't just an MT, it was across the board, and I think one of the questions was, how do we use our marketing budgets? And I think, so I'll lump both of them in together. What was absolutely critical for us, and this is something that even at the board, they were super supportive of, is I was very clear to the team, as in terms of marketing rupees, we have zero. But if you want to use our yogurt as currency, we're very rich. And what I mean by that is, sample. Now, we are fortunate enough that we have a low rupee entry price point. So we can sample. We can break the cup. We can give people spoons in stores. And that's where I think with modern trade, I know with modern trade, we took one or two accounts early on and we really focused on sampling. I've personally gone myself, my co-founder, we've all spent time in stores sampling. And then we built a phenomenal sort of sampling program. And that's when we started getting velocities and momentum. Then when you go to subsequent retailers or you get inbound inquiries from subsequent retailers, they start reducing the listing fees. It's a churn. There's no secret sauce. It's really, again, brand strength, how you get the momentum. And my advice would be, if the economics are not making sense up front, wait. Take that and build it off of GT a little bit, build some of the super premium GT stores. These modern trade guys are always snooping around. They're always looking for what next. So I would take my time. They do come down over time. I mean, there's an account that took us 2 years to crack. And if you look at what they first quoted us in year zero and what they quoted us at the end of 2 years was literally like 20 or 30% of what they first asked us. Once you get some strength, modern trade will play ball. But it's not an easy one. You have to churn with them.
Right. The next one, let me take this. Hi, Rohan. How do you think through your innovation pipeline and strategy? How long is your current pipeline of products?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of alluded to this earlier. So we're very focused on an architecture, what place, and I can have that offline chat with whoever needs to. But the way we we have a very defined architecture. I mean, Hari knows this, of course, Deepak knows this very well, and we keep a good amount of products in our pipeline. So at least a year out, we've got stuff in our pipeline. What's important though is experimenting and failing. I think that's super critical. Making sure that we know what failure is and defining that failure fast and then sort of just moving on. Putting too much energy and effort behind a product that's not working can really be a drag on cash, can really be a drag on resources, can really be a drag on time. So simple answer, a 1 year out pipeline in play, and then iterating on that pipeline constantly and constantly doing experiments to see, does it really, at what metrics do we get this out to the larger distribution? Otherwise, we launch with a very, sort of defined, short, consolidated distribution.
Great. Rohan, I know we've hit our time limit. Hope it's
I can do maybe one more because I've got
perfect. Cool.
9:05 is my next call. So
perfect. So, let's take this. I think it's important, because so the question is on how did you ensure that the perception of yogurt was beyond just a breakfast consumption product? I think it's a very interesting one in terms of, how you thought through the occasion for consumption, which is quite critical in new category creation.
Got it. So for us, we were never defining ourselves as a breakfast brand. And I'll share some metrics on that. We were very clear that within our positioning, we were a healthy snack and we played in the choti si bhook category. And what that means is, the small hunger in between breakfast and lunch and in between lunch and dinner and even potentially post-dinner. What we found is, and we've stuck to that, we've not changed any of that. If you look at it, you'll see snack is constantly in all our communication. What we found though, is when you translate that, we've got a pretty much a 33 distribution, and we're not going to change. So 33% of our consumers are having this for breakfast. 33% of our consumers are having this for dessert post-dinner. And 33% of our consumers on a daily basis is daily dessert. And 33% of our consumers are having it as that mid-meal snack. And we believe that because we are positioning ourselves as that choti si bhook snack, we're getting the dessert and the breakfast as well, because people are looking at small, people who don't want a huge breakfast, who just want something on the go. It's falling in on breakfast, and who want it, sort of post-dinner, a sweet, just a sweet sort of healthy kick before they go to sleep, are having that as well. We will not change that. We will not talk about breakfast. We will not talk about dessert. We continue to talk about snack. And we will keep talking about snack, because that's working for us across the portfolio. And that's sort of pretty much as simple as that.
Got it. Perfect. And, maybe the final question to wrap up, Rohan, for those listening in, if they want to be as successful as Rohan, what would your advice be in terms of skill sets required, personality traits that could help them get there?
Look, I think what I've learned in a big way over time, obviously, again, my answers are going to be cliche, but I'll try and give you some examples. So 100% people. I mean, just having the right people around you. I think we've been very fortunate. I've been very fortunate. Literally everyone on our leadership team is far more intelligent than I am. And I'm a big believer in listening to them. I prefer playing moderator than being the guy who tells you what to do and it's my way or the highway. I find, healthy, and especially as you're trying to scale and build an organization that's not an individual dependent, I think that's super critical, for folks to do that. And I know it's I think it's important to start looking at that early in the journey, what your management style is, how you sort of build the org. And for us, I think we've been very blessed and fortunate to be able to have folks like that who've joined the team, who've been able to sort of come in. You meet a lot of them, Hari, at the board meetings. We bring a lot of them in to talk. And I think that's really important for them to sort of know that when they recommend something, it's going to be heard and it'll most likely be actioned. It's not just going to be what Rohan thinks, right? And I think that's super critical as we build this org going forward. That's the kind of company we're trying to build. And so far so good. And I think it sort of fits in with consumer centric as well, right? So people centric in terms of consumer, but also people within the company, and sort of mixes up really well. And I mean, I'd sort of leave it at that. I think in terms of hunger, I think stay with the hunger. This stuff does not happen overnight. It'll never happen overnight. So it's a long churn. But there is sort of a chasm to be crossed. And when it crosses, it's a lot of fun. And I can honestly and proudly say today, I'm having so much fun. It's awesome.
No, awesome. That's great advice, Rohan. I know we're completely out of time. Really appreciate you taking the time out. Thank you again, and thank you everyone for joining in. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely, my pleasure. And Rohan at drumsfood.com. Anyone that wants to reach out, I'm always available. Please feel free. Although I'm in touch with most of the entrepreneurs here, maybe some of the new ones I don't know, but please feel free to reach out. Always happy to help.
Thanks so much, Rohan.
Hey, thanks everybody. Thanks, Hari.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.